Here.
Sacramento San Joaquin Delta Conservancy, Campbell Ingram.
Present.
San Francisco Bay Conservation and Development Commission, Harriet Lai Ross.
Here.
State Water Resources Control Board, Jay Ziegler.
Present.
U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, Spencer Walden.
Present.
U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Donald Ratcliffe. And that is it. If anyone else that I didn't mention, please say no.
Thanks, Eric. We have a quorum. I'm sure that you all have enjoyed walking into this building and seeing how gorgeously it was renovated and all the hard work that went into it. So we're pleased here to have Mr. Warren Fox, who's going to tell us a little bit more about the schoolhouse that we're in.
Good morning and welcome to the schoolhouse and welcome to Clarksburg. We also ordered the weather for you, so I hope you enjoy our town. I'll try and keep this short. There's so much to say about the building that you're in. The group that put this together, I'm serving on this board, the Friends of the 1883 Schoolhouse. And it's just been phenomenal what the community has done. This project, to get to this point, it's been about 13 years. And this building was moved 4 years ago from its original site, a couple of hundred yards down the road. And it was built in 1883, obviously, and it functioned into the 20s when this new elementary school was built over here. And then it obviously didn't quit serving as a school. But it was on property, it was bought by a landowner who had a lumberyard there. And they put a metal roof on the top. And that protected this place for like 60 years or whatever. So it's so fortunate that it had been saved and maintained. Not because of anybody's long range planning, but because it was fortuitous. So the building was moved here. You go on our website, you can see the picture of the trucks. It comes up here, comes around, giant school on it, and comes down here, and all the kids were let out of school to come over and see it move here. And of course, it's up on this foundation because of requirements for flooding. And the original schoolhouse was actually built on stilts. It was like 5 or 6 feet tall, something like that. So I want to thank you for your interest in the Delta and in Clarksburg and all you do in your various agencies. This is just such a wonderful heritage of this whole area of the Delta and particularly Clarksburg. I'm a newbie here. I moved here about 4 years ago, and I realized I'm going to be a newbie forever. So that's okay. But I've certainly enjoyed the community and also working on this project. So what you see here, this is an original 2-room schoolhouse. And the sliding doors right here on the side are the original door. They've been resurfaced and so forth, and they shut. And you can divide this into 2. So there was a classroom that could be here and one there. And the black stove you see back there was in the middle of this room, and there was one in the middle of this room, and they went up right through the ceiling, and there was black smoke and all of that originally. But obviously we couldn't keep those because it would be hard to use this facility like you are now if those stoves were still here. So what also, there's a lot of original wood. They saved what they could. We tried to save the blackboards. Well, these up here are covered. Is the one in the back? I guess the one in the very back is not covered. And you can see it, and there's original chalk marks on it that were in the school when it would, it's stored lumber. That's what the company did when they bought this building. They had other buildings, and this one they just put lumber in here. So they left it all alone. And that's some of the original writing. There's some over here that you can see. There's some mathematic problems. So take out your pencils. We're going to have a quiz. They tried to save as much as they could, but when they started taking down those chalkboards, they just crumbled. But we did try to save some just for historical significance. It has been wonderful to see this thing open and to see people use it. You're relatively early in the list of people who have come here. We haven't been open that long, and we hope to have these types of meetings for the community and serve the community with this. It's sort of a landmark for Clarksburg. We also want to have a welcoming center here. We're going to be building some things for people to stop. We're pretty early. When you come down the Delta, you see Clarksburg. We want to have information available to people who say, where am I going? What's here? And we will have information for people as they're coming down the Delta. And we also want to be a real community center. We're going to have oral histories of all the early farming families and the history of this community and all the ethnicities that were here, beginning with the Native Americans, who we have consulted and asked if they would put in this building and outside what they would choose to have to represent their history of living in this area. We have a partnership to do that, and we'll have that available for people too. You'll also see this picture here, right middle, and it's in your little handout. And if you'll look at this picture of the students in front of the school, you open it up, it's on the left-hand page. And this is an actual photo of a class. I think it's 1920 or something. You understand from the history, this is the only school in the Delta which was not segregated. And you can see the various students who were enrolled here at school. Japanese students were lost during the internment. There were over 150 Japanese families here. We have a partnership with their association to have some of their oral histories. And we're going to have rotating cabinets here for different ethnicities at different times, different programs, different issues, so people can learn more of the history of this place. So it has a wonderful history. You also can see on this last page here, if you right in front of you, if you look at this, and it has the development of the school. And the first picture you'll see here at the top of your little handout is what it looked like when it was with the lumberyard. And you can see that metal rope that saved it. Then when it was moved here in the middle, you can see kind of what was happening in the interior. And in the bottom, you can see what finally transpired. We're eternally grateful to local residents, put hundreds of thousands of dollars into this effort for many years. And then for the Prop 68 funds that were awarded for the land and for the school. It would have been impossible without that kind of help to maintain this cultural and historical building in this area. So you're sitting on a piece of history, rebuilt, of course, tried to save the floor. They couldn't because you'd go right through it. But a lot of this wood you see around here is original, and it's true to its original form. I mean, it did make the move, and it's been refurbished, and it's been just a real gem for this community. So we look forward to having you back sometime for other meetings. I know you all have meetings up and down the Delta. And for example, I think today may be convenient. It's good to get you to know our school back in Clarksburg and to see what's happening in this community. So thank you and good luck.
Thank you. Bravo. Good job on the building. Thanks so much for being here and for giving us that information about this. I think it's incredible. We're going to hold our Delta Stewardship Council meeting here at the end of April. That's right, Beck. Yes. So we will definitely be back. I also wanted to welcome a couple of other new faces to the dais here. We've invited State Parks and the Wildlife Conservation Board to join us at the table to be part of today's meeting. given the topic. So please welcome Rebecca, Deputy Director at the Wildlife Conservation Board, and James Newland, who is a Planning Chief at State Parks. Welcome. We have one more short piece of business. I think in the packets that you guys should have received, the DPIIC members, we have our October 2024 meeting summary. And so we just want to make sure that no one has any edits to that meeting summary. Nope. Okay. And Beck, do we have an attorney here today? Is Vera here or?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay, I was going to see if we needed to take a vote on this or we just accept it.
No.
We don't, no vote? All right, so the meeting summary will stand without a vote needed. So with that business out of the way, let's get going. I'm excited to be here and look forward to meeting a lot of you and talking to you throughout the day. We've got a couple of tours that we're going to be going on, but before that, we're going to talk a little bit about our Prop 4 funds and invite a bunch of the departments that are here to come talk about what they're doing with that. But first, I want to do a recap of the DPIIC Restoration Subcommittee that met last month on March 13th, and they discussed how we can collectively continue to reduce barriers to restoration in the Delta and connections between Delta Adapts, which is our climate change strategy, and the Restoration Subcommittee's work. So next up for the Restoration Subcommittee is the Restoration Forum, which will be held May 1st here at the schoolhouse. This is the third time the subcommittee has convened this forum, which provides locals and restoration practitioners with an opportunity to learn about the current and planned restoration efforts in the Delta. And in the past, the forum has been well received and included participation from local, state, and federal partners, as well as community-based organizations. And you can contact Amanda Bowl for any further information about the Restoration Subcommittee. I also understand that we have Nicole from Senator Cabalden's office with us today. Hi, Nicole. Thanks for being here. We just wanted to welcome you. As always, please reach out to our Ledge and Policy Advisor, Brandon Chapin, if there are any other Ledge folks here or anyone wants to come and visit. So I'll just turn it over to any other members before we dive into the Prop 4 topic. Does anyone have any other updates they'd like to share or provide? Nope. Okay. With that, go ahead, Lisa Marie. I think I have you a little bit later, so I can turn it over to you. I think I don't remember exactly where, but I know it's in here at some point. Oh yeah, you know what? It is right here. Sorry. I need more coffee.
Thank you, Shirley. I'm Lisa Marie Wyndham-Myers. I'm the Delta Lead Scientist in service to the Delta Stewardship Council. And I want to highlight a program that the Delta Science Program, an effort that we've just kicked off. And we're hoping to highlight it at the fall DPIIC. So I just wanted to put it on your radar. We are kicking off a collaboratory effort, something that you've heard about before at previous DPIIC meetings. We're evaluating 3 projects together this summer to identify opportunities and outcomes in collaborative modeling across agencies. And the topics that we're focusing on this summer are harmful algal bloom predictions, salinity intrusion management, and tidal marsh food web and restoration. And so we're still in contracting right now, but we are expecting a kickoff meeting in late May, early June, and we're hoping to report findings in November. Just wanted to put it on your radar.
Thanks, Lisa Marie. All right, so that'll conclude this agenda item. I'll ask Eric if we have any public comments.
There are no public comments, Chair.
So we'll move on to agenda item 2, which is our Prop 4 conversation. As many of you know, the Safe Drinking Water and Wildfire Prevention, Drought Preparedness, and Clean Air Bond Act of 2024, that are known as Prop 4, is a $10 billion bond with vast implications for climate resilience projects and programming across the state and its many agencies. Can we cue up the slide that we have for this right here? The bond directly allocates $179 million for Delta needs to 2 DPIIC agencies, including the Delta Conservancy and the Department of Water Resources. The need for investment in the Delta is significant at $2.4 billion for already defined projects, programs, and flood protection efforts. This number was presented at the August 2023 DPIIC Restoration Subcommittee meeting. It's our understanding that many of the Prop 4 funds have not yet been allocated and may not be geographically tied. So we're curious about how these funds could find their way to Delta projects and programs with the potential to greatly impact its resilience to climate change stressors. We're hopeful that the interagency collaboration here today can help support these needs throughout the implementation of the bond. So I'll turn it over to some of our agency representatives to give us further insight into their bond, its rollout, and how they plan to use their Prop 4 funds. Samantha, do you want to kick us off?
Sure, I'd be happy to kick it off. Good morning, everyone. I'm Samantha Arthur, and I am Deputy Secretary for Water at the California Natural Resources Agency. Glad to be here today and to be talking about this really important topic. I'll tear off a little bit of what Julie said to give a bit of an overview and talk about the Natural Resources Agency's role in the bond, which is really a coordination role. So as Julie said, this is a $10 billion bond, and it came across the finish line in November with significant support from our voters in California. So I think a real recognition of the need for investment in the critical issues that we have in our state around water management, around wildfire, around park access, around biodiversity, and many of those converge and touch down in the Delta, of course. The bond is really organized around those topics, and some of the departments and agencies here today will talk about how they have their specific allocations and plans for those. In terms of the Natural Resources Agency, we play primarily a coordination role for the bond, and we're working with our entities that are, our kind of sister entities, including Delta Stewardship Council, Central Valley Flood Protection Board, Department of Water Resources, Delta Conservancy. We're all kind of part of that family together to try to coordinate and ensure that the investments from this bond have the greatest impact that they can. And I think that's particularly important at this time because we know there's increased uncertainty around federal funding. So how important it is that our state has this resource and that our voters have at this time put forward that investment. I think is coming at a really critical time. So the principles that we're looking at this funding through, the principles that we want to see carried out in the bond fund across the board are to ensure that these dollars are strategic, that we maintain momentum in places where we already have successful programs and continue to build on that the funding be as multi-benefit as possible. And I know that's something that's talked about a lot here and in our entities and folks who work in the Delta to think about how benefits can layer on top of each other and can have increased impact to stretch those dollars. We're seeking to be coordinated. And then I also want to highlight the importance around accessibility and our work as entities to ensure that these bond dollars are as accessible as possible. And that means both, reaching far in terms of attracting the grant applicants who participate in bond funding, but also to make it as simple and kind of clear to be able to access that funding. The bond funding, this particular bond has in the statutory language a requirement for benefits to disadvantaged communities. So that's somewhat unique in this bond, in that it's a kind of higher threshold than we've seen in the past. And so that's a really important area of coordination among our entities to be ensuring that we're getting meaningful benefits to disadvantaged communities and hitting that required threshold of 40% of the bond dollars going to disadvantaged communities. And then of course accountability is the other really important piece, that on the back end we're able to actually measure outcomes and kind of look at the whole of impact at the end of the day. So Natural Resources Agency plays that coordination role, and so what we're doing is really facilitating the conversations around the program administrators in our different entities to ensure that folks are thinking with a collectively about, how do we ensure that we get those disadvantaged community benefits? How do we seek opportunities for efficiencies in our application processes to make this funding more accessible and go further? So that's the type of work that we're doing right now. The process for the bond funding to actually go from voter approval to in the hands of the different departments who then will either do direct projects or grant programs to distribute that funding is a process between our administration and the legislature. And that's what's happening right now. So in January, our administration put forward a proposal for $2.7 billion of that $10 billion to be spent in fiscal year 25-26. That means starting July 1st. So this July and 25 and going to the next June. So that's the proposal that the administration has put on the table. And that's the dialogue that's happening right now between the legislature and the administration about the appropriate amount of funding to put forward in that first year. And we've actually put forward a proposal for the first 2 years. And let's see what else I want to say. So that process, even though the $10 billion is established by voters, that process is the important step for actually designating the amount of funding to put forward of that total $10 billion. And we're really enthusiastic about the amount that we're, that our administration has proposed. That's a significant portion of the bond funding, and I think it reflects the groundwork that communities have built and departments have built to have programs in place. And frankly, this type of work to establish, like, here are the needs that we already know are in place, and that allows us to turn around and propose for that funding to be designated sooner than later. So that's the process right now from the Resources Agency. I know I did receive a question about in the bond, there are a few pots of funding that were designated directly to the Resources Agency. And I think that's in because the question here was, okay, what pots of funding that aren't specifically tagged as Delta may actually be able to go to the Delta and be, funneled in that way through the granting process. And I think folks here will talk about how that's relevant in kind of their arenas, like, Rebecca, you'll talk about Wildlife Conservation Board and the granting process there. There are a couple pots that are specifically at the Resources Agency in the parks section of the bond. And we have not proposed to designate the bulk of that funding yet, to build kind of more time to plan how that funding would roll out. And I think we envision that existing programs and departments and conservancies are potential vehicles for that Resources Agency funding to basically be distributed.
Thank you. That was super helpful. Really, really appreciate it. Campbell, can I call on you next?
Good morning, everyone. Campbell Ingram. I'm the executive officer of the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta Conservancy. For those that aren't familiar, we are a state conservancy. We serve the Delta and the Sassoon Marsh. And our role really is to take bond funds or public funding and invest them in ecosystem restoration and economic development, community development in the Delta. We've been around for about 14 years, and over the course of that existence, we've made about $130 million available to Delta projects, probably about 140 projects in total. I do want to mention that the funding for the public funding that came for the schoolhouse that you're in actually came through the Delta Conservancy, Proposition 68. So our role really is to take state funding, we take federal funding, sometimes general fund and bond fund, and then work with the community to identify projects that both meet state interests as well as the community interests, and then implement those projects moving forward. So we received $29 million in the bond, for which we're of course very grateful. We anticipate opening our solicitations for that funding in the fall of this year. We'll divided evenly amongst our three major programs. One is ecosystem restoration, one is nature-based solutions, mostly dealing with subsidence and carbon issues in the Delta, and then the last one is community development, public access. So while we're very thankful for that amount of funding, literally the Delta has got $29 million for all ecosystem restoration, all climate work, and all community development work in a $10 billion bond. So I think what this really highlights, the Delta is just not getting the attention that it needs on these issues. So I think we're going to talk a little bit more about some levy funding, which is very important. But that really is trying to support about a $1.1 billion identified need in the Delta. Julie mentioned it, but back in 2003, we brought together all the Delta partners, the agencies, the NGOs, and other partners, and we tried to identify around restoration and community and levies, you know, what can we reasonably spend? What do we need in the next 5 to 10 years? For levies, that came out to about 1.4 billion, and for climate restoration and community, that came out to about 1.1 billion. Now, that also is really intended to support the targets in Chapter 4 of the Delta Plan, which is trying to restore between 60 and 80,000 acres of land in the Delta. It's also trying to meet the nature-based solutions targets that were recently established for wetlands of about re-wetting about 50,000 acres of peat soil in the Delta by 2045. And then, of course, just supporting all of the myriad projects that are out there trying to move the Delta economy in the right direction. So again, my point, and I just repeat this often, is the 29 million for those purposes is just a paltry amount. And I think we need to work collectively together to really better push and support broader funding for the Delta. So that's really our message today. Given these shortfalls, we have tried to talk about accessing a couple of the pots of money that Samantha had mentioned. We requested an additional $50 million for nature-based solutions, as well as trails and more public access in the Delta. We haven't, as Samantha mentioned, they have not decided how to allocate those funds yet, but we're certainly hoping that we can have access to those pots. We also, in the past, have partnered closely with the WCB, and so we're looking at trying to use our funding to catalyze and get projects going and provide relatively smaller portions, and then look to some of our better funded entities to help support those projects moving forward. So again, while it's great to have this funding, I think we'll do great things. I think the money will go fast. We've got projects lined up already waiting for this funding to make it happen and have real transformative effect in the Delta, like this facility. But we certainly need more money. Thank you.
Thanks, Campbell. Next, I'll turn it over to Caroline Cook from the Department of Food and Agriculture to talk about their efforts.
Thank you so much. Yes, I'm Carolyn Cook. I'm an assistant director in CDFA's Office of Agricultural Resilience and Sustainability. And if you haven't heard of us, that's because that's a brand new name. We just announced a change in our office's name last week at Ag Day. Previously, we were known as Office of Environmental Farming and Innovation. And we're about 10 years old, and we house some of the and administer some of the grant programs in the department that directly serve producers and help them work on the resilience on their farms. And we are also, really working closely with regional and local organizations that kind of provide that technical support network for farmers closer to where they live than we do. So about the bond, in our office, there are 3 programs that have received or have been, will be receiving funding from the bond, which is exciting. So 2 of them are very established programs and quite popular. We're usually oversubscribed and have been funded in the past through general funds, greenhouse gas reduction funds, and previously Prop 68. So that's the Healthy Soils program, and also the State Water Efficiency and Enhancement program, which we call SWEEP. So through Prop 4, Healthy Soils program is slated to have about $65 million to distribute, and that's statewide. The SWEEP program, $40 million to distribute statewide. And there's a third new program that will be under development called the Regional Equipment Sharing Program. And there's 15 million set aside for that program. So a little bit more about each of those. The Healthy Soils Program has a suite of practices, probably about 40 practices that are considered conservation agriculture practices that support multiple benefits on farms, like carbon sequestration and soil fertility and water retention in soil. So that program will likely work really hard to get it available and open up an application period once we have funding available in the next budget year, the next fiscal year, sorry. Same with the SWEET program. So the SWEET program is really focused on conserving water. It's irrigation focused. Farmers can apply for things like improvements to their irrigation system to conserve water, like drip systems and tools that help them schedule their irrigation at the right time and for the right amount of water. So those two programs will come up in the fall, hopefully. And then the Regional Equipment Sharing Program, which is a new program, we'll be working really closely with our Office of Farm Equity, our Farm Equity Office, and the advisor there is Thea Rittenhouse. In the first year that we have we'll be doing a lot of planning and thinking about the best way to structure that program so it meets the requirements of the bond, but also target as a pilot program, target the money where it's needed most. And yeah, so we don't anticipate actually opening up an application for that program until the next year, and hopefully get those awards out in that next year. So right now we are, like Samantha mentioned, we'll be waiting for additional guidance from CNRA around the parameters of the bond funding. We anticipate we'll have to make some adjustments to the current program structures to meet the priorities of the bond, but also to really direct the projects to disadvantaged communities and priority populations like the bond funding requires. So we're looking forward to that. So, thank you.
That's terrific. Thank you. Very informative. Next, I'll turn it over to Jay Siegler from the State Water Board.
Julie, thank you for that. So I can be pretty quick in this. I do want to note at the top that we're grateful also there's an additional $5 million that the Department of Water Resources has shared with the state board to update the Cal Water's data modernization system at the state board. And so in particular, I've talked in this group about the OpenET-based water reporting, water accounting methodologies that we're using in conjunction with the OpenET folks, Stanford, UC Berkeley, UC Davis, to kind of further refine this, and in our own Delta Measurement Experimental Consortium, in which a number of the folks around the table and their agencies are participating. So we're excited about applying this to water accounting methodologies and upgrading the state's water database. There's an additional $500 million in the Safe Clean Drinking Water program that's administered by the state board that could benefit communities both in and on the edge of the Delta. And those funds can be used for emergency water supply, for digging safety of wells and infrastructure around that. And then just consistent with what Campbell has highlighted here, there are lots of opportunities for synergies in using funds that have been identified in the bond for natural infrastructure programs that may well ride nicely with the state board's consideration of a water quality control plan update in the Bay Delta region. And so in particular, more funding could be available for levees, for channel maintenance, localized dredging in partnership with local reclamation districts, and natural habitat programs that have a water quality and species benefit, in addition to groundwater banking projects that in the Eastern Delta area, the Harvest Water Project that Sac Sewer has undertaken and is far along with, as well as the Central and South Basin groundwater banking efforts. And so, together there really are a mosaic of programs that could ride nicely with the Healthy Landscapes and Rivers voluntary agreement restoration program in the Delta, that would have organic support in the Delta and could really be a nice complement to helping achieve the Healthy Streams and Rivers objectives in a water quality control modernization and or further update of the water quality control plan as the year goes along. So those are things that I think I'm reaching out to all of you and all of you in the Delta to really kind of think about what can we do that helps complement an updated water quality control plan in the Delta and achieve the objectives that a number of stakeholders have put forward in the Healthy Streams and Rivers program, and where those could ride potentially together, addressing kind of in Delta needs to improve water quality, improve water supply reliability, and generally invest in natural infrastructure in ways that are really compatible with objectives of these agencies and folks in the Delta as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Jay. Next, I'll turn it over to Tom Gibson from the Department of Water Resources.
Thank you. So at the Department of Water Resources, we received one pot of Prop 4 money that is specific to the Delta, and then a number of different pots of funding that are mostly statewide. And there's one specific of those where we're looking to put a lot of that money to work in the Delta, and then others, the Delta is certainly part of where that money can best be spent, and we're still working through, and we'll have processes for those funds. So the one Delta specific pot is for the Delta levies programs, and we are breaking that into our two Delta programs. One is for the Delta levy maintenance subventions program. We're putting the majority of funding to that, where we cost share with local levy maintaining agencies to rehabilitate and maintain the over 800 miles of Delta levees. We are proposing to spend that out over the course of the next, I think, 6 years through 30-31 fiscal year, but starting July 1, about $15 or so million a year each to that program. And then the second program, which will get the remaining about $60 million. And sorry if I didn't mention, the total pot for the Delta levies is $150 million. So after the subventions program, the remaining about $60 million will be used for our Delta levies special flood control projects program. And that will be for the purposes of improving Delta levees, and we will, in flood control projects, we will be doing a competitive solicitation for that. Maybe one round, maybe two rounds. We'll start working through that, but we are looking to get that about $60 million out for Delta levies. At this point, I should circle back to, I think what Campbell and Jay have both mentioned is that I know that those dollar amounts don't nearly reach the need here. Being mindful of that, we are looking at ways through staffing and other efficiencies we can try to get to the same level of benefit we've been able to get through previous funding, even with the lesser amount of money. So that is something we're working on. We're very mindful of. Beyond that, in the broader statewide flood control subvention program, there's another $150 million in Prop 4 for that. We're looking at using half of that, or $75 million, in the YOLO bypass, and that would be spread out over the next 3 years. But that's funding that we're looking to bring to this area, and the other $75 million will go to our urban flood risk. Beyond that, there are a number of statewide funds that are of potential relevance to the Delta and can be used in the Delta as well. I can mention those briefly. Riverine Stewardship Program, where we're looking for, in particular, like cold water habitats and other projects to support the governor's salmon strategy. We have a brackish desalination pot of funding, the Water Storage Investment Program, and additional funding for that program, which is intended in part to bring ecosystem benefits to the Delta. $100 million for watershed resilience and our integrated water resource management programs. $75 million for ag and urban conservation programs, which includes a data component for irrigation data. Following up on what Jay said a minute ago, funding for Sigma implementation, $15 million for a stream gauging program, again, to get a better data for our water system. $250 million is for our state plan of flood control. That's the state's responsibility area for levees. And then $480 million for dam safety and climate resilience. So those are we have a few other pots of funds, but those are the main ones that have statewide applicability that I thought I'd mention here.
Okay, there it is. The sun is right on it. Thank you. That was very helpful. At our October DPIIC gathering that we had, our focus at that meeting was all about levees. And recently, some of the folks from the council went down and some of the engineers that worked on the Victoria Island breach talked a lot about how the levees were made and just really impressed upon us the need for more funding in those areas. So I'm glad to see that you guys are putting some money towards it. That's terrific. Thank you. Next, I'll turn it over to Rebecca from the Wildlife Conservation Board.
Great, thank you. Good morning. It's really neat to be back in the Delta again. Happy to be here. My name is Rebecca Friss. I'm a Deputy Executive Director at the Wildlife Conservation Board. And WCB has been around about 76 years, 77. And we are a granting agency under the Natural Resources Agency. We work very closely with the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And we really focus on restoration, acquisition, and public access projects. So as has been mentioned, we're also very much a partner to many other entities to really get some of this work done. So we have done some work in the Delta already and would be available to do continued work in the Delta as we move forward. We're rewriting our strategic plan right now. We're just updating that. And so for the Prop 4 implementation, that will be tiered off of our strategic plan. It is out for public comment through the middle of May. So that could be found on our website. But again, those the priorities that we're focused on that will come through the Prop 4 funding are protecting biodiversity, enhancing climate resilience, providing that access for all to nature, and also, really the connectivity for wildlife and implementing the state's priorities around climate, water, the salmon strategy, and all the things we've already been talking about. So that's what we'll be focused on as we implement our Prop 4 funding. WCB will receive about $1 billion from the bond, and all that won't come at once. As mentioned by Samantha, that comes through our annual budget process. So for this budget year, we're potentially going to receive about $230 million of that $1 billion that's coming to us. And I know that sounds like a lot of money, but actually with all the demand, we work statewide and we have a number of proposals already that we're evaluating. So again, the partnership and really collaborating on how to get the most important work done is going to be really important. We are going to do a webinar about our Prop 4 funding on April 21st. That also could be found on our website if you want to sign up for that. And if you want to get notifications from the Wildlife Conservation Board, there is a subscribe button on our front page that you could also sign up for. What else? So for the priorities for this year and the pots of money that we're getting, they're coming from the water pot and the biodiversity pot. So there is money that's going to be specific to stream flow enhancement, that overall protection of biodiversity, and specifically habitat connectivity. So those are the types of things that we'll be funding through Prop 4. So again, if you want to get engaged, our application process is actually an open, continuous process. So folks could apply now. Anybody that has a good restoration, acquisition, or access project is free to call us at any time. We do have some current existing balances in Prop 1 and Prop 68, as well as some other small balances in other pots. So we are taking proposals now, and then we'll continue to take those for Prop 4, which would be implemented in the fall. So even if when the budget is passed June 1st, it'll take a little while, or July 1st, it'll take a little while for that money to actually get to us. So for us, Prop 4 projects also wouldn't be implemented till later in the fall of this year at the earliest. But for folks that are interested in projects, you can actually go ahead and put in a pre-application now. We have a short pre-application on our website under the grants tab, and you can throw that into the mix now. And we evaluate those over 6 to 9 months, and get them ready. We have a board of about 7 members that meet 4 times a year to approve projects. And so our next meeting is in May. But for the Prop 4 funding, the next likely or the first likely time for Prop 4 projects would be November at the earliest this year. So we're part of the team doing all the collaboration to get on the same page about definitions and processes of just how to implement the Prop 4 funding. So we'll continue to do that and continue to look for partnerships so that we can really get good work done on the ground.
Thank you. I know the department couldn't be here today, but do you know if they're getting any funding or if any of your funding is going towards the eradication of nutria and then addressing the golden mussel issues?
So yeah, you're talking about the Department of Fish and Wildlife. They actually didn't get a lot of specific money through Prop 4, but I think they would be hoping for some of those joint pots. I know in the past we've actually funded eradication of nutria. I think that project closed in the last year or so, but I would imagine, if they get some of those funds, that they would be implementing those types of projects as well. And we partner with them as well on their priorities.
Awesome.
I
Thank
just
you.
quickly add that we've actually funded the bulk of the nutria eradication effort and don't really have an identified pot moving forward to continue to support them. So we need to definitely focus.
Yeah. Okay. Next, I'll turn it over to James Newland from State Parks.
Thank you. We can hear that? Good. All right. Well, thank you, and I really appreciate the opportunity here. First off, I'm Jim Newland. I'm currently serving as the Planning Division Chief for State Parks. And so I'm here instead of my boss, Deputy Director Alex Dell, who's the Deputy Director of the Strategic Planning and Recreation Services Division. And I was also told yesterday at our OHB meeting that I needed to send greetings from our Director, Armando Quintero, and our Chief Deputy, Liz McGurk, who would love to be here. They always love to come down here and visit. You all get to visit one of our parks here real soon today and say that. So they want to make sure that specifically that was clear to everybody. And they're in budget hearings today, so priorities, unfortunately, but we'll get there. So I just want to also feel sort of welcome in that, I've nearly 30 years with the department, and my first half of my career was in historic preservation as a state historian. So congratulations to Clarksburg on this wonderful project. So I feel very welcome to that. As I turn to the right, I see the panel on the Azorean Portuguese in the valley, of which my mother's family, 100% Azorean Portuguese, had a dairy farm in Tracy, Gustine area for about 40 years. So I do feel genetically home. So I feel good with that. So wonderful to be here. State Parks has been allocated approximately $625 million from this $10 million bond, $1 billion bond. About $425 million of that it would distribute through the department and the system itself under 4 different programs, which I'll mention here, and another $200 million which will go to our Office of Grants and Local Services for distribution to local and regional park agencies throughout the state. So that's the general sort of overview part of that. The 4 programs we have that will get some of that is, the first is our deferred maintenance program, which will get about $175 million to help us address infrastructure and systems that need updating within our 280 park system across the state. We're currently now working on setting up the prioritization and for us to address our long list of deferred maintenance to figure out what's the highest priority that also meets the goals, of course, of the legislation and the proposition. So that's sort of what will be going on there. And as you've heard, we will not be requesting all of that right away. We'll be spreading that out to make sure we can adapt as the next few years go. As we all know, things happen. I mentioned a little bit about that as well. So that's what's going on with that one. We also have approximately $200 million in the forest health and watershed improvement, or the stewardship of state-owned lands portion of the system. And in that, we're really looking at how we can address the goals of the administration and this act in scaling up our forest and wildfire resilience programs as we adapt. And as you've all known, we recently took a pretty heavy wildfire hit down in our Angeles district over the last few months, losing pretty much the entire Will Rogers State Historic Park, which I spent about 10 years preserving all those buildings and all, as well as about 70% of Topanga State Park, which is the largest urban state park in the state, surrounded completely within the city of Los Angeles. So some big hits. And so this is very close to home for us, unfortunately. and has been for a while as we've dealt with it. I'm based down in San Diego, so we've dealt with some other large fires over the last 25 years that I've been with the department and dealing with that. So this is all part of our, implementing our interagency strategy as well on how we can work together and best take those funds and balance them out against other agencies and other departments and jurisdictions to make sure we're getting the best benefit in the landscape scale as well as the specific park improvements we need to do for that program. In addition, we received about $50 million in our sea level rise adaptation strategy program, which was something that I was part of that committee for the last few years, and we're now starting to implement. We had some funding before it was pulled back, but this is now coming in to help us take on that. And once again, the same thing, we're probably going to allocate maybe half of that to start this first year. And our assumption is we probably won't ask for the rest for at least 2, maybe 3 years to see how some of these pilot projects and implementations work out so we can be even more efficient with the remaining funds as that moves on. As we have many efforts along our coast, we have about 1/3 of the coast in state parks ownership and management. So it's a huge public access issue for us as well as all the folks here in the state to make sure that we are addressing both impacts from both sides in many of our state parks and our state beach areas. So that's what's going on there. And then the last $200 million is going to our Office of Grants and Local Administration Services so that we can distribute those. Now that is the one place where I believe we'll probably request all of it right away because we know that many unfunded grant requests to that division over the last few years, that the demand is probably already there for that $200 million right away. So for all those agencies and local folks, keep an eye out. We hope to have soon to get out what all the criteria and all for that grant funding should be coming up in the next fiscal year so that we can go ahead and start receiving applications because we pretty much feel that we'll be able to distribute that probably within that first cycle. There's that much need we know out there for addressing these kinds of issues in the state at the local agencies. So that's pretty high level. Certainly if there's any other questions, but we're pleased as always to have some resources that we can both use to work on our 280 park system, but also to distribute to our local park agencies and partners as we move forward to implement this.
That's fantastic. Thank you. So next, I just want to open it up to any of the folks that are here that might want to ask some questions about some of the report outs that we've had. So yes, Diane Burgess.
Thank you. So I'm really happy to hear about the effort to look at the subventions program and making sure that we are funding the levies. I have a concern because as someone that oversees budgets myself on different things, there's always this thing about one-time money or short-term money versus long-term. And as much money as we put into something while we have it, I would really like to see a long-term plan on making sure we're taking care of that. So I just wanted to throw that out. One of the questions I've asked our lead scientist, and I'm interested in kind of spreading the interest amongst everybody else, is what is the impact of these very large wildfires on our water quality? I know it's an emerging thing that we're still learning. It possibly depends on the proximity of the wildfire to the water bodies. But I'm just really interested in bringing that up to, for us to talk about, the amount of sediment, the amount of material that's, what are those impacts? So I'm curious. And I think you were the one that talked about need versus what actually, and so I just think that it's important to, in these times when things are not as, the uncertainty is high, is that we are really addressing need and trying to armor ourselves in long term. I also am concerned about the monitoring and data collection that has traditionally been funded by the federal government. And I want to make sure that we are identifying those things that are really necessary for what we value, what we need, in managing our water supply, managing habitat, and making sure that vacuum that is occurring on the federal level doesn't, that we're mindful of that. I am also interested in parks and DWR maybe talking about leaning in on improving recreational boating. So that's one of the things I'd like to ask about. And let's see. I'm interested in knowing what's going to happen with Brandon Island State Park. And then the last thing is, as a member of the Delta Protection Commission Stewardship Council, the Delta County Coalition Supervisor in Contra Costa County, I'm really interested in what we need to do to deal with golden mussel. I feel like I'm ready to jump and push and champion what we need to do, but I haven't really heard from the experts what we need to do. And I know that they're figuring it out, but how much of a priority is that? So those are a bunch of my comments and questions, and I'm sure those that are in the know or have an answer can kind of something.
Thanks, Diane. All right, any other comments or questions from any of the panel members? Yeah, Lisa Marie.
There were about 6 questions there, Diane, but I just wanted to address the one about wildfire and water quality because it's an issue beyond sediments. It's old and new contaminants, and retardants, and so on. And so, that's the focus that we've had, and we do have a couple of products coming out this year on that, including a special issue on extreme events and wildfire events and water quality. But what I was struck by as well, just the hearing about all these landscape scale actions that we're doing. I know that there's not direct science funding incorporated into Prop 4, but the overlap of what you're describing with our science action agenda is huge. And so the opportunities to address some management needs with some improved monitoring and modeling in these sites so we can actually make sense of future actions. I would hope to incorporate that, or hope you think about that and take a look at our science action agenda because it overlaps with the flood risk, the salmon, the climate issues, and so on.
Thank you. And then it kind of had some questions for DWR and state parks that I threw in there, so I wanted to give them an opportunity.
Sure. Well, as it relates to water quality, it is going to be an issue. Obviously, the challenge we have with the fires down Southern California is significant amounts of urban housing, which creates what people don't realize is massive amounts of hazardous material that washes out. And
we call that urban drool.
Well, there you go. Yes, and so that's a huge challenge. I don't know that's as much here in the Valley, in that you don't have that sort of intense urbanization usually in the properties we're talking about, but it's certainly something we've had to deal with as well as all the agencies down there in Los Angeles dealing. And certainly the folks in Santa Monica Bay are already seeing significant, numbers changes in the water there, as well as that overall what's going to happen in the local watersheds as well. So certainly that is something that's part of what we're looking at when we talk about wildfire resilience. How do we address what's there, and is there ways to mitigate that out front and remove things that might exacerbate that if in fact these properties burn or nearby, those kinds of things. So that is something that's in that high level for us is we're certainly watching that when we see these significant events, these really conflagration sort of things. As for Brandon Island, we're having a presentation luckily from a local district staff and our planning staff, and you'll be hearing a little bit about our water connectivity initiative that is allowing us to fund a lot of the planning and for the Central Valley, which it's about 25 years ago that we created our Central Valley strategy in state parks. In fact, Alex Stell, who could be here, was key in that, where I was more in the urban parks down in Southern California. But certainly that's something that you're going to hear a little about, and so you'll hear a little about what's going on with that, as well as the planning we're doing at Delta Meadows and Locke when we make our tour earlier.
I guess I can briefly say one thing in response to water quality and the fires. I know that in in response, the preventative thing is the best, but in response to the fires, we're very mindful and work with our state office of emergency services through these watershed teams to make sure we're preventing as much as possible sediment from getting into the water supplies, because that is obviously a big concern. Quickly on golden mussel, I can mention, I know that we do have a very good coordination among parks, Department of Fish and Wildlife, ourselves and others about how we're addressing golden mussel. So I don't have all that information at my fingertips, but I'm happy to follow up and get you that information.
We'll invite you to the Delta Protection Commission for our next meeting.
Okay, I think we have a representative, so we can make sure they're, I don't know, Samantha may know who, someone, okay.
Oh.
Okay. So Samantha and I can coordinate, we'll make sure that a response is provided. And then just on the boating that you mentioned, the recreational boating, I'm thinking through my head, it's possible that through our division of multi-benefit initiatives, there could be boating components of recreational aspects of these multi-benefit projects, but overwhelmingly for us, it would be recreational components of state water project facilities, wherein we partner with state parks to do those things. And I know there's also the aquatic invasives and things like that we're always working on to make sure that we're maximizing those opportunities. So I don't know.
Yeah, I can jump back. Certainly want to check with our Department of Boating, the Division of Boating and Waterways, which is now back within our department. And they've dealt with a lot of the mussel eradication where we're trying to educate as well and those kinds of things. I'm not sure what their funding pool is, probably very similar right now. I'm not sure how much money, but certainly check with them on that. And you'll hear a little bit from our district planning team about what we're doing in these general planning efforts here about things like water trails and other things that are, wanting to make sure we're addressing those recreational opportunities, not just this typical traditional camping and day use, but how are these other possibilities, especially here in the Delta where there's so many water recreation opportunities for people, and our new park at Dos Rios, which we'll be starting that planning up as well. So.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll just kind of emphasize that with when Prop 4 was, being voted on and thought about, we didn't anticipate the vacuum of science that is occurring. And so I want to make sure that we are backing that up and making that also part of the consideration.
Sorry, one more. Just remembered the science and the monitoring component of what you had said, and I maybe can make a plug for the Delta Stewardship Council Science Program, which is something we're looking at for determining what's really the critical monitoring that we need to maintain, and to make sure we're being strategic about, we're trying to match resources and needs, figure out what are the most critical, most important monitoring efforts to continue on a science basis and make sure that we can keep those moving. So it's something we're definitely mindful of.
Yeah, the same thing. Our strategic plan was just completed a couple of years ago. I was very involved with that, and a big element in there is our outreach to underserved and underutilized communities that don't maybe even realize they have these recreation opportunities, especially here in the valley. And so we're really trying to do it's a little more outreach sort of communication and trying different techniques under our visitor use management program. What's the best ways to get to communities that maybe don't speak English or don't even have that tradition of family and understanding open public recreation. So we're really working, you'll hear a little bit about that, what we're trying to do in the outreach for this planning effort to make sure they're aware of the parks and aware of the opportunities that the parks provide them in recreating. So.
It's interesting, in the district that I represent in Contra Costa County, there are children that have lived in Antioch their whole life who have never been on the water, do not know about the Delta, have no clue about the immense history of what we have here in Northern California. So it is really important, and I appreciate that work.
We find it actually statewide. We have similar stories of people who live within 5 miles of the beach in Los Angeles who've never been to the beach until they're taken on a special program to the beach, right? Same sort of issues I'm sure here with some of the working communities and such that just aren't familiar, don't have the cultural. We dealt with this actually on a couple of projects. Was speaking to some of the local providers about when they asked them, they were funded for a new community center, and they asked them, "What do you guys want? Swimming pools?" Oh, it's a very hot area. No, because where they came from in Central America, you didn't go swimming in lakes and rivers because they were dangerous places. So that cultural background sometimes is challenging for folks to even think, well, why would I even go there, right? Or the assumption that it's in the state parks where all the lions and tigers live, those kinds of things, and we have to help them. Well, we have bears and some other things, but help you understand that, no, this is actually an opportunity for you, and it's actually a benefit to your family and a fairly expensive benefits.
And I had the pleasure of spending time with Director Quintero on Tuesday, and he spoke about a campground that they were not welcome, that folks weren't welcomed in at a certain point. And I know that here in California, we want to make sure everyone feels welcome and to enjoy and celebrate the cultural and natural resources that we have. Thank you.
Great. So I think we've accomplished what we wanted to here today. We wanted to highlight that, how much funding is actually allocated to the Delta versus, our $2.4 billion need that we have, and an opportunity for some of these unallocated funds. It sounds like a lot of them are going to be in grants that aren't necessarily allocated specifically to the Delta. So that will rely on others who live and want to work in the Delta to apply for those grants. I think it would be a good idea for us to consider kind of a one-stop place for people who are interested in applying for grants related to Prop 4 to be able to go to and see, what kind of statewide grants are available under Prop 4. Maybe that's something we can think about of where that registry might sit, and make it easy for people that want to do to obtain some grants that might be statewide, but they could do that work specifically in the Delta. Might be a good idea. All right, do any of our members have any other comments? Yes.
Julie, just along that line, I do know that the Resources Agency is trying to develop a sort of a singular free proposal that will have similar information across all, so that we can actually look at those proposals, and if we can't fund it, we can pass it on to other entities that potentially can. So
great.
that could be helpful.
Yeah, very helpful. Yes, Jay.
Thanks, Julie. I want to just speak to the importance of Tom, Sam, and others have spoken to on the integration of science in the Delta Science program, and thinking about how we make that program more accessible to all stakeholders. I think baydeltalive.com is a great start. I think we can really build out that site and have some opportunity to do so for real-time understanding of both threats and flow conditions and water quality altogether in the Delta to advance that understanding. And I also want to give just a nod to the points that Dr. Wyndham Myers is raising about the importance of really integrating tidal energy modeling, estuarian productivity, food export, as well as maintaining salinity objectives at the same time. I mean, that's kind of the holy grail, but we all know we're failing fast in these things. And we face a reality of sedimentation challenges, sedimentation management challenges in the Delta, which are impairing channel capacity and as a result in lower flow conditions, especially circulation in the South Delta, which exacerbates HABs, exacerbates other water quality challenges in the South Delta. And so I think there's a great opportunity to roll this stuff together, and to Fred Burgess's point of recognizing that we know we can effectively spend $100 million a year on levee maintenance throughout the Delta, and then we could get to really a sense of confidence that we're ahead of the problem and we're ahead of the challenge. And I think we need to align science-based pathways to achieve those goals and ground them, and then hold ourselves accountable to meeting those outcomes and reporting from where we are. I think that we've just got to do a better job bringing these things together. Almost none of these projects would have the same funding source. They all generally have some local funding, some state funding, some federal funding. And I just want to underscore this importance of addressing the levee maintenance and channel capacity issue in the Delta, because it is a water quality issue, it's a water supply availability issue, and it affects both in Delta as well as project interests. I'm pleased to say that working pretty actively with the department, the state and federal contractors, in thinking about how we address this channel capacity issue with a smart new dredging approach, including looking at expedited permitting as well as funding and other approaches to kind of align interests in this. But it is a local, a state, a federal problem we all need to be working on together. And so I just want to make sure that we're
Thanks, Jay. Yeah, well said. All right, what I'll do is turn it over to Eric to see if we have any public comments on this agenda item before we move on.
No public comment, Chair.
Okay. We went a bit over time on that item, but I think it was a really good conversation and totally worth it. So I'm going to turn it over to Megan Harrison and Katie Rowe to talk about the efforts to develop the Delta Meadows State Park into a new state park property into a new state park. And we're looking forward to hearing more about their plans. And I think they're going to abbreviate their presentation just a little bit, and we'll cover some of it when we're actually out on the tour, which is going to be our final two agenda items to tour the Delta Meadows Park Property and the Locke Boarding House site visit. So, hi, thank you, and welcome.
Hello, thanks for having us. I'm Clint L. Schultz. I'm the Diablo Range District Superintendent. And with me is Megan Harrison, who's our Delta Sector Manager and our District Planner, and then Katie Metro, who's with planning, strategic planning in our headquarters office. So we're here today. We're going to briefly go through our slide deck in the interest of time and getting everybody out into the field and enjoying this beautiful day. We're going to cover the Delta Meadows and Locke Boarding House planning efforts, and then also the investments we're making with the Waterway Connections Initiative. Next slide, please. All right, so state parks in the Delta, as many of you know, we have four units. Brandon Island State Recreational Area, that's already been mentioned today. French Track State Recreational Area, Delta Meadows Park Property, which we get to go to, along with the Locke Boarding House Museum. Next slide. So just a little more detail about where Delta Meadows is located, near the town of Locke. We'll be headed out that way, and then also the Locke Boarding House nearby. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Katie to go over our general plan process.
Next slide, please. So our general plans are our primary land use management document. It's similar to a city county plan, where we look at all aspects of how we manage a unit. So anything from resources, public access, recreation, park operations, education, interpretation programs. And so this park property is going through a process where we look at the types of potential park uses, which is part of the classification and naming process. And then we also look at all of the resource management requirements and potentials for our community partnerships and such as part of this plan. Next slide, please. While we're waiting for the next slide. So we started this project about a year ago, and it's being funded by the Waterway Connectivity Initiative. And it has several components. It's specific to planning. We are gathering all of our existing conditions to establish our baseline conditions. So we've conducted natural cultural resource surveys, but also another big component of this project is our community outreach. We have conducted a couple of public meetings that were really well attended, and also have been working with our various agencies, state, local partners to ensure that we know all of the potential uses and also all of the compliance requirements that we have. One of the big benefits of a general plan is that it is integrated into the local community as well. So anything that we're doing at this property, we want to make sure that it's compatible with regional and local uses as well. And I'm going to turn it back over to Megan.
All right, so in the interest of time, I'm going to cover all of my slides at the site. We'll talk about natural resources, we'll talk about cultural resources, we'll talk about the Waterway Connections Initiative projects that we have in addition to planning, both at Brandon Island and at Delta Meadows and Locke Boarding House. So I'm going to close it there, and we're going to hit the road, I think.
Thank you. Sorry to feed you through that, but we do want to get out there. It's so gorgeous out. Although I don't really want to leave the schoolhouse. It's so cute. So we're a little bit behind. I think what we'll do is on our schedule, it says 11:15 at the Delta Meadows Park Property. It takes about 20 minutes to get there. We want to leave time for folks to use the restrooms here before they go. So maybe we'll push that to 11:30. Beck, do you see any problem with that? Okay, so we'll meet over there at 11:30.
Chair,
before
do we need public comment before we close?
Before we head out, I'll just ask for any public comments on the Delta Meadows agenda topic.
No public comment.
Okay, thank you. All right. So there's plenty of parking at the Delta Meadows Park property, but folks can carpool if they have an opportunity to. There's no bathrooms there, so as I mentioned, please take your time here before we leave. And we will reconvene the meeting at 11:30. And if you don't know the way, just follow James.
Julie, I just want to flag, I think there's an important issue for the DPIC agencies to think about. And some of us at the state board have been working with Campbell and the Delta Conservancy. And if you'll look at, I'm just going to go over to the map for a second. But I want to compliment Megan and Dan and the team on the outreach that they're doing and just briefly highlight some work that Hewitt and UC Davis graduate school is doing in kind of visioning what the park could be. And so the Delta Meadows area, where we're over there, is about a 700-acre area. And that's detailed in the inset there. So we're here. Right next to it, the Department of Water Resources restoration site of McCormick Williamson track, which is underway and will be fully restored with tidal inundation of 2/3 of the island. And we won't be able to see that from our side, but it's important to recognize that this is the site of a giant broadcast tower that we'll see. There's a ring levee around it. And part of this project was improving all these levees to PL 8499 standards to accommodate the broadcast area. And then bridging across I-5, there's the 50,000-acre Casumnas Preserve area. And so there's a real opportunity to pull all this together as a vision for recreation and access. There's also the Bureau's modernization of the Cross Delta facility here. So there's a state-federal dynamic partnership here, and there are some constraints that state parks has in their planning process that I think we need to work through together. Because they can only look at areas where they have direct land control, but there's a public-private partnership that manages 50,000 acres over here. It would seem like a heartbreaking level of lost opportunity if we didn't find a way to put those together. And so I think that's just something that DPIC agencies need to be thinking about together, because almost all of our agencies in some way have kind of touched this area. So thank you.
Yeah, that's a great connection. Thanks, Jay. Appreciate that. And I wanted to also mention that after the Delta Meadows Park property, we'll be heading over to the Locke Boarding House. I had the opportunity to go there last April when Locke had their spring festival, and it's really cute. They've done a great job renovating it, so we'll get to see another historic building on our second tour today. So we will see you all over at the Delta Meadows State Park.